So we've learned about cells and the components that make up cells, and we've also talked about the ways that cells are organized within the body. Today we're going to focus a little bit on genetics. This is going to be a very brief overview. We're going to end up doing lots of different activities with genetics, lots of hands-on things, lots of labs, to kind of help you understand things a little bit more. So to start out with, we have a man named Gregor Mendel. He was an Austrian monk, and he worked with pea plants to try to test different ideas of how heredity worked. So he tested several different traits within his studies, and those traits we now call alleles. He studied flower color, seed shape, pod shape, stem length, and flower position. Mendel noticed that for each of the characteristics, there were only two possibilities, two possible traits or alleles. He discovered through that then that some genes are dominant and that some genes are recessive. He also determined that genes, for pea plants at least, had two different possible types or alleles. Before we go any further, let's talk about a few definitions. Genetics, first of all, is the study of genes and heredity. But then, what's heredity? Well, heredity is the passing of traits from parents to their offspring. Another keyword that you're going to need to know is genes. Genes are things that are made of DNA, and they're located in chromosomes. DNA, and you've probably heard lots about DNA, but DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Just take a moment and try to say it. Deoxyribonucleic acid. This is what genes are made of. DNA is in the shape of a double helix. It's kind of like a ladder that's twisted. DNA contains 4 different bases. We represent those with an A, a C, a T, and a G. Adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine. G and C only pair with each other. They never pair with anyone else. And then we have A and T, and they only pair with each other. They won't ever pair with the G and the C. This is probably a little bit confusing right now, but we're going to make lots of models, and we'll focus specifically on DNA in a later PowerPoint. Here's a picture of what this looks like, sort of. There we have our thymine, adenine, guanine, and cytosine, and it shows how they match up together. Here's another picture that shows the double helix a little bit better and how that it's curved. Chromosomes occur when DNA coils up very, very tightly. Every human cell, for the most part, there are some anomalies, has 23 pairs, or 46 total chromosomes. You get 1 pair of chromosomes from each parent. So that means you have 2 sets of each gene. You get 1 from your mother and 1 from your father. And then each different form of a gene is called an allele. If you're a little bit confused, stay with me. We're going to do lots of activities with this. So just to give you an idea, this is what the DNA looks like. And then when it's coiled tightly, it creates the chromosome. Here is just a drawing of a karyotype showing the 2 genes on each chromosome. This is a representation of a cell. Remember that the chromatins, the chromosome, all the DNA genetic material in most cells is found in the nucleus. So these little X's represent our chromosomes that are in the nucleus. And another drawing that takes the DNA, the double helix, coils it up into histones, coils it up, shows you how it creates the telomere and the centromere. You don't have to write any of that down. Here's an actual example of a human karyotype. So as you can see, they don't necessarily always look like X's, or in the case of a male, a Y, but it's the closest representation. Genes, or alleles, can be either dominant or recessive. Dominant genes are expressed with a capital letter, and for here I've given you the example of a capital letter B. That doesn't mean we'll always use the letter B, it's just an example. Recessive genes are expressed with a lowercase letter, so for example a lowercase letter b. Whenever you choose a letter, you have to use the same one to represent both the dominant and the recessive gene. Just another example here. Don't want you to forget that the DNA coils up, makes the chromosomes, and are found in the cell. And one more time in case you weren't just sure. A genotype is the information that's carried on a gene. And so, for example, these little representations are carrying the genotypes here. It's the information that's carried on a gene. The phenotype is actually the physical characteristic, something you can observe. Okay, so you can observe that this flower is purple. This flower is like a maroonish and white color. So the phenotype, physical characteristics that you can observe. We're going to use Punnett squares throughout this unit to help predict a phenotype. So we'll start with the genotype to try to predict the phenotype. The genotype of the father goes on one side of the square and the mother along the other. The traits of the offspring go inside. So for instance, here is the mother's genotype. Genotype is the letters. So we have a dominant and a recessive. And then the father's is right here with a dominant and recessive. That's the genotype. So the genotype of the child, these are the possibilities of offspring. The phenotype then is depicted by these pictures of the flowers. So basically, whenever you create a Punnett square, you take the father's chromosome, put it in the box, the mother's chromosome, and put that into the box. Let's try this one. It'll make a little more sense. So the father's, actually these are the mother's chromosomes, I'm sorry. Females are represented by two X's, males are represented by an X and a Y. Okay, so that's the difference. So the mother's X goes here, father's X goes here. So the possibility is that for this offspring would be a female. Here, the mother's X goes here, the father's Y goes there. This is the probability that the child would be a boy. Again, the mother's X goes here, the father's Y goes over here. Probability that that one will be male, and then the mother's X and the father's X will go here. So basically, the overall probability of having a female child is 50%, and the overall probability of having a male child is 50%, because 2 of the 4 squares have double X's, while 2 of the 4 squares have an X and a Y. Probability for our purposes is expressed in percentages. So as I just explained, the chance for male offspring is 50%, and the chance for female offspring is 50%. Parents and offspring can have either heterozygous or homozygous traits. Heterozygous means that the gene has one dominant and one recessive trait. So for instance, a capital letter and a lowercase letter. Where homozygous means that the gene either has 2 recessive or 2 dominant traits. So 2 capital letters or 2 lowercase letters. Here's just another example. Okay, so this would be homozygous. They're both capital. This is heterozygous. We have a capital and lowercase. Heterozygous, capital lowercase, and homozygous, 2 lowercase. Finally, we're going to end with a brief discussion of a pedigree, which is a chart that's used to study genes and inheritance patterns in humans. Males are represented by squares. Females are represented by circles. Those are all of the notes for today. I know it's confusing, and I know it took a while to get them done. Write down any questions that you have and make sure you ask them in class. Remember, we're going to be doing lots and lots of activities with this. So if you don't understand something right away, please let me know.